All right, so you want to talk about relationships, huh? More specifically, those fascinating connections that thrive without physical intimacy.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. We've got some excerpts here from pasted text.
Connection without borders. Relationships without physical intimacy, right?
Exactly. Sounds a little niche, maybe, but it's really eye-opening. Gets you thinking about connection in a whole new light.
That's what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
To kind of shake things up and see things from a new perspective. So, what's got you hooked on this connection without borders idea?
Well, the first thing that struck me is how it really challenges the traditional definition of a relationship.
How so?
Well, we tend to default to thinking about romantic relationships, right? The kind that usually involves, physical intimacy. Like, that's the standard.
Yeah, I get that. It's easy to get stuck in that mindset.
Right, exactly. But this source, it's like, hold on a minute. There's a whole spectrum of connections out there that are just as valid, just as meaningful, and they don't necessarily fit that mold.
So it's kind of like saying the only way to enjoy music is to go to a rock concert. Sure, it's one way, but there's like classical music, jazz,
Yeah.
a whole world out there.
Perfect analogy. And that's exactly what this pasted text thing is getting at with this, what they call a connection kaleidoscope.
Connection kaleidoscope, I like that. Has a nice ring to it. So what's in this kaleidoscope? What kind of connections are we talking about here?
Well, it runs the gamut. We're talking about relationships built on emotional intimacy, shared experiences, intellectual connection. It could be anything from those really intense long-distance relationships.
Those can be really intense.
Right. Or even just like those incredibly deep platonic friendships, the kind where you feel like you can tell the person anything.
The writer dies.
Exactly. Your ride or dies.
Mhm.
And this is interesting, it talks about online communities and how those can foster really strong bonds between people, even if they've never met in person.
It really makes you realize that connection, it's not just about physical proximity, is it? It's about something deeper. And this whole idea of emotional intimacy, that seems to be like the core, the heart of it all.
Absolutely. And the source really emphasizes that it's not just about what you share, right? It's about how you share it.
The quality of the sharing.
Yeah, it's the vulnerability, the deep conversations, really feeling seen and understood by another person. That's where the magic happens. And it's interesting because the source argues that these elements, they can be even more pronounced in relationships where you don't have that physical intimacy aspect.
Because you have to work harder to connect on other levels.
Exactly. You're forced to develop other ways to communicate, to be emotionally present with each other.
So it's like, in a way, not having that physical aspect can actually push you to be more emotionally intimate.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
And the source gives some compelling examples, like this one couple who maintains a super strong bond, even though they live in different time zones.
That's tough. How do they make it work?
A lot of effort. They do virtual date nights, share their daily experiences, even find creative ways to celebrate milestones together, even though they're miles apart. It just goes to show that you don't have to be physically present to have a deep, meaningful connection with someone.
You know, it's funny because we often hear about long-distance relationships not working out, but this source makes it seem like maybe those relationships that do survive, they could actually be even stronger because of the challenges they've overcome.
It's like anything else, right? The
Yeah.
more effort you put in, the more you get out of it. And when physical touch is off the table, you're kind of forced to up your game in other areas.
It's like they say absence makes the heart grow fonder, right?
And something like that.
Yeah.
But it's not just about romantic relationships. The source also talks about the power of platonic love,
Yeah,
calls it like the unsung hero of meaningful relationships.
I can see that. Platonic relationships, they can be just as deep and fulfilling as romantic ones, sometimes even more so. What does it say about platonic love?
Well, one thing that stood out to me was how they talked about how these relationships, they can often require even more work than romantic ones.
Really? Why is that?
Because society doesn't necessarily give us the same roadmap for platonic relationships. There are all these expectations and norms around romantic relationships, but with friendships, it's a little more ambiguous.
Yeah, you don't really see like platonic anniversaries or best friend contracts, do you?
Exactly. So we have to figure it out as we go, which can be challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. And, there's actually a study they cite in here.
Oh, yeah. What did they find?
They found that people with strong platonic relationships, they experience all sorts of benefits,
Like what?
like reduced stress, increased happiness. They even found that people with strong friendships tend to live longer.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. It really underscores how important it is to nurture those close friendships, doesn't it? Now, We can't talk about relationships in this day and age without talking about the elephant in the room. Technology. I mean, love it or hate it, the internet has fundamentally changed the way we connect with each other.
No doubt about it. And the source, it actually spends a good chunk of time unpacking this whole idea of online intimacy.
What's that all about? Is that even a real thing, online intimacy?
Right. That's the question, isn't
Mm.
it? But one thing that really resonated with me was how they differentiate between just, you know, interacting with people online versus true online intimacy. They argue that it's not just about, like, liking someone's posts or whatever. It's about those deeper connections, the vulnerability, the shared experiences.
So just like in the real world, it's about quality over quantity.
Exactly. And just like with any relationship, it takes time and efforts to cultivate that kind of intimacy online.
It makes you wonder, though, if it's really possible to be truly intimate with someone if you've never actually met them face to face.
Right. It's a good question. And the source doesn't shy away from that debate. It actually brings up some interesting points about how online communities, in particular, can provide a really unique form of support, especially for people who might feel isolated or disconnected in their offline lives.
I can see that. I mean, there's a sense of community there that you might not find in your everyday life.
Exactly. And it can be really validating, especially for people who feel like they don't fit in elsewhere.
It seems like the overarching message here is that we need to broaden our definition of what a real or meaningful relationship can be.
100%. That's really what it boils down to. This whole connection without borders idea, it's about recognizing that there are so many different ways to connect with other human beings, and physical intimacy is just one piece of the puzzle.
It's about celebrating all those different types of connections, whether they're romantic, platonic, online, offline, you name it. If it brings you joy and enriches your life, who are we to judge,
Right,
right?
right. And you know, I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Me too. So as we wrap up this deep dive on connection without borders, it really makes you think about your own life, doesn't it? What are those connections in your life, the ones that really nourish your soul, that maybe don't fit the traditional mold? Take a moment to appreciate them because they're precious, every single one.